Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Chala, Perek Aleph, Halacha Aleph. Today is the final daf of Halacha Aleph. We're learning daf Zayin. We're dedicating today's class Le'ilui Nishmas Chaim ben Nisan, which is Kavan's brother. Today is his yahrzeit. May his neshama have an aliyah. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
And Kavan, you and your mom and your family should be healthy and well and live until Mashiach. Amen.
Amen. Likewise. Thank you.
So it's really going to be a fascinating daf. We have to go back to the opening of the sugya, which we had yesterday on Davav Amid Beis. In the Mishnah, it says, just quickly going all the way back to the beginning. First of all, there is the din of Chadash, which means that prior to the Omer, we already went yesterday, Chizkiya, Rabbi Yechanan, Rabbi Chia, the bringing of the Omer, the day in which the Omer is brought. Let's just say the Omer. Prior to the Omer, one is not allowed to eat from the new crop of any one of the 5 grains. And then we learned another din in the Mishnah. And that is, prior to the Omer, one lachatchila should not even harvest, imagine, any of the 5 grains. Now, we already learned this in Bavli, that the ladder wasn't kept that strong. In other words, it wasn't unusual that when the Omer was brought, people went to the marketplaces, there was already ready to sell flour from the Chadash, which is not ideal. But there is, in other words, that's what you learn. The Ktsir, even Ktsira, should not, these are 2 dinim. Now, put both of these dinim on a very low shelf, and I want to go back to the machlokes we had yesterday between Rabbi Yoina and Rabbi Yosi, which, as we see, are real, like Abaye and Rava almost, in the Yerushalmi, the kind of Rabbi Yoina and Rabbi Yosi. We want to know what were to happen if grain, any one of these 5, took root between the harvesting and the bringing of the Omer, in that window. And someone pointed out, we're talking about 12 hours. We're not talking about, don't forget, guys, the harvesting of the Omer is done the night prior to the bringing of the Omer. So we can cheshbon from when the Omer could be harvested, which is in the beginning of the night. Maybe it means from when it was de facto harvested. I don't know that. Like we had yesterday, the Yom is mated, the carbon is mated. But let's go to the general. There is the night of the Ketzira, and then there is the day in which the Omer is brought. The Mishnah says that any one of the 5 grains who did not even have Hashrasha prior to the Omer, you know when you can eat it? You have to wait until next year's Omer. So the question is, what happened again if the Hashrasha happened? It happened before the bringing of the Omer, but the Hashrasha did not happen before the Ketzira of the Omer. So let me go with what we learned yesterday, because today the Gemara is going to prove that we are right in remembering it's a machlokes Rabbi Yoina and Rabbi Yosa, but whatever I'm going to say now was a mistake. The Gemara, each one said the opposite opinion. But let me go back to the beginning. This is Davav Amid Beis. Rabbi Yoina says that as long as it took root before the Hava'ah, before the Omer was brought, you're good to go. Even if it only took root after the Ktsira. Rabbi Yosi understands the Mishnah to mean that in order for the Omer to be mater, the Chadash, it needed to take root, her chevra, even before the Ketzira. Guys, make no mistake, we're not asking today, what is the mater? What is the mater was the prior machlokes, Chizkiya Rabbi Yechanan. The day or the Omer. Now we're talking about what becomes muter, just to have clarity between the sugya that we had on Dafei, Davdala Dafei, and now the sugya that we're having on Davav and Dav Zayin. What is the mater is the original machlokes. Now we're learning into that which is becoming muter. The Mishnah says needed to take root prior, very simple, before the hava or before the ketzira. I'm just going to repeat the words we had yesterday. Rabbi Yoina explaining himself. I'm not going to repeat it. Rabbi Yoina says, hava materes la hava, the way we had that version. Ktsira materes ktsira. That means even Rabbi Yoina is moida that the other din, there's about eating chadash and about even harvesting chadash. That you're right. In order for you to be allowed to harvest the chadash for ktsira, then the chadash needed to take root prior to ktsira so'omer. It's like a logical thing. But when it comes to the issue of bringing it as a carbon, also meaning eating the chadash, the determinant The critical is that it took root before the Hava. In other words, he's more lenient. And we are up on Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, in which Rabbi Yossi will verbalize more what we currently understand to be his opinion, which is that no, in order for the Chadash to become permitted, the Chadash needed to take root not before the bringing of the Omer, before the Ketzira. Guys, no one is saying that the Ketzira allows you to eat it. The matir is either the Korban Omer or the Hayoy matir. Just don't get confused there. But what is becoming permitted, according to the current understanding of Rabbi Yossi, only that which took root before the Ketzira. This, what I'm saying now, is just so important. I know it's simple, but it's important because if not, you're going to get confused. What we're going to prove right now is that we have their opinions reversed. We're going to prove it. What we said Rabbi Yoina is Rabbi Yossi. What we said Rabbi Yossi is Rabbi Yoina. So we're going to go into that. We will also mention, I know we touched upon it yesterday, how long does it take for something to take root? So our Gemara will follow the Shita that holds it takes 3 days. Really, in other words, it means that you needed to have planted it when? Let's go by the 13th. 13th, 14th, 15th. It should be koidem ktsira. If it needs to take root before the bringing of the omer, then really you can plant it on the 14th, 15th, 16th. I'm saying that because of the rule of mixas hayoim kukulei, which is said for this, and we're going to go into that mixas hayoim kukulei when we learn the Gemara later. We will also learn that de facto, most people did not work the land on the 14th. If you remember, there's a whole Perek in Masechtas Pesachim, Mokem Shunahagu. But there were many people that had a minig b'chlal not to work on Erev Pesach. I know people that have a minig never to work. But we're talking about they normally work on Erev Pesach, they don't work. So we're going to close up that sugya. And then we're going to go and expound on the final clause in the Mishnah, God willing. We'll get there. And that is that if it didn't take root whenever it needed to take root, so it's usher to be eaten until next year's Omer. So the Gemara asks a very simple question. Imagine someone planted something, let's say theoretically on the 14th of Nisan. Let's go with the opinion that holds that it needed to take root before the Ktsira. It was 1 day off. So you can't eat that until when? Till next year's Omer. Are you allowed to bring next year's Omer from that? Again, don't confuse the matir and that which is becoming mutter. Now, why not? Why would you think not? Well, why would you think yes? Because it's waiting for the Omer to be brought. Even, I'll tell you why maybe not. Don't get confused one thing with the other. Every product that grows has its year. Remember that Trumas U'Maiseres? We learned over a year Trumas U'Maiseres, and you should only be Toidem Ma'aser from 1 year from that same year. By grains, what's the determinant of a year? I'll remind everyone. If it grew a shlish before Rosh Hashanah, it belongs to the older year. If it only grew its shlish after Rosh Hashanah, then it belongs to the later year. Here we're speaking about Korban Omer. It would be a little bit ironic for you to bring the carbon from barley that benegea the dinim of what year does it belong to? It belongs to the old year. One can argue, just like by Trumas, you can't do that. Maybe for the Omer, you also can't do that. On the other hand, you can't eat it until the Omer is brought. That will be the final back and forth we'll have in the Gemara. And again, Chevra, let's dive right inside. We're mamish on top of Daf Zayin. Currently, go back. Machlokes Rabbi Yoina and Rabbi Yossi stands. Currently, we understand that Rabbi Yoina is more lenient. Rabbi Yoina understands that for someone, for Chadash to become permitted through the Omer, Korban or the day, it needed to take root before that, before the bringing of the Omer. Even if it took root after the Ktsira. Rabbi Yossi currently seems to be saying, no. The Omer is matir. The Korban is matir, the day is matir. But you know what it's permitting? Only the grains that took root prior to the Ktsira. Okay, so Amar Rabbi Yossi, I argue, that's what we are saying, that Ketzira is matir, both the Hava and the Ketzira. What does it mean, Hava? Hava means bringing a carbon from the new Korban mincha, bringing a minchas nesachim, bringing bikurim. And really, again, just to repeat what we said yesterday quickly, be'emes, lechatchila in the Beis Hamikdash, one would only bring a korban from the Chadash after the Shtei HaLechem was brought. No, it's the only korban that's being brought from the Chadash, lechatchila, is the Omer itself. Nevertheless, b'di'eved, once the Omer was brought, and someone from their ignorance and their goodwill, they want to bring a korban mincha, and they bring it from the wheat of Chadash, you're good, only after the Omer is brought. Now, that wheat that you're bringing needed to take root, says Rabbi Yossi, before the ketzira of the Omer. That's the meaning. Ketzira, taking root before the ketzira, is needed for the Omer itself to allow you to bring it as a korban, also meaning which will allow you, the hedya, to eat it lechatchila, because for the outside the Beis Hamikdash, the Omer is matter for people to have chadash lechatchila, and also for the other din in the Mishnah. You can't even harvest grain before the Omer is brought. But once the Omer is brought, you could harvest. But what grain could you harvest? You can only harvest grain that took root prior to the ketzira. 12 hours earlier, 10 hours earlier. Okay. So it's the Omer's Ketzira is the only critical event. That's how you know what is becoming matired. Says the Gemara, Frek the Gemara, Lefum Kain, according to this current Mesoira, that Rabbi Yoine was the lenient, Rabbi Yossi was the machmer, Rabbi Yossi Chavaba. Rabbi Yossi himself showed the students to show his opinion. He said that Kotzar l'Rabim, what were to happen? He asked a good question. If the Omer was harvested, the word l'Rabim means the barley that's harvested to be brought as a korban is being brought on behalf of the Rabbim. It belongs to the Rabbim. It's not a korban yachid, it's a korban sibur. That's just the way he spoke about the Omer. You harvested the Omer, and prior to bringing it, it became tamei, which means you cannot bring it. So now the question is, does that affect anything? Now let me tell you something, my friends. If the critical event is the bringing of the Omer, I'm not talking about what's permitting, what is becoming permitted. If something took root before the bringing of the Omer, whether you cut it and you ended up bringing it because it remained tahor, whether you cut it and it became tamei, now you have to cut more, is b'chlal not legeya. B'chlal not legeya. If the critical event is the harvest of the Omer, then there is an issue. You cut something, the ketzira, this was the time. Then it turned out that what you did is not going to be brought anyways. Now you have to do a new ketzira. So does that erase that which was done? So let me tell you the following. That according to Rabbi Yoina, according to Rabbi Yossi, Kotzal Rabban v'nitma, and Rabbi Yossi paskin chazar hayachid li'isuroi. That means if people cut their new grain, that according to him, he's very machmed, may not even be eaten. The question is why? Why? According to Rabbi Yossi, the ketzira is the critical determinant. During the ketzira, it was not tamei. During the ketzira, it was not tamei. So what that it was not brought? Fakert, from this we clearly see that Rabbi Yossi does not view the ketzira as the critical point. It's all about the bringing of the Omer. Now, by the way, even if the critical point is the bringing of the Omer, what we said yesterday to Rabbi Yoini, which is really Rabbi Yossi, the din that ketzira is matter, the ketzira is a din on the ketzira, which is gavaldik. But when it comes to the din of bringing a carbon or eating, if Rabbi Yossi would have been the one that would have said what we know, sounds like, that the ketzira is the critical point. If you harvested barley, the Rabbim, and at that time it was tahar, then you should be good. But he didn't say that. He said, if you harvested and then it became tamei, what you did has to be erased. It's as if you didn't do it. Why? The ketzira was done at the moment with tahar dika barley. And according to the way we think Rabbi Yossi holds, that ketzira is matir, not only the ketzira is matir the hava. Guys, I know that you're not going to be bringing it. Again, don't confuse. When does it actually become mutter? When you bring it. But what is it matter? That which took root prior to what? That which took root prior to the ketzira. So if something took root prior to this ketzira, it should be good to go. The fact that Rabbi Yossi says that if chazar hayachid liisurai, therefore the Gemara says that we have to therefore reverse the opinions. Let me just read it inside. The same opinions to the opposite direction. Rabbi Yoina was the one that said that the critical time is the ketzira. And Rabbi Yossi is the one that says what we had yesterday. Rabbi Yoina koydem lava. Okay, at least now we know who says what. Yes. Normally you koitz it. They would do it the night of the 16th. They would harvest the barley. They brought it into the Azara. But when it came to all of the menachos that were brought in the Beis Hamikdash, what did we learn together, Yakir? Do you remember how many times did they sift it? It was Yena Maisa. If everything went okay, it was a big avoida because they made it very, very refined. And if it turned out that during that process it became tummy, then they went back into the fields and they harvested more. You can't say that because it was a real ketzira. But if you don't care, if it's all about the bringing, now that we discovered it won't be brought, so whatever happened until now should be erased. Makes sense. But if the ketzira is the critical point, the ketzira was okay. Even though you're not going to bring it. It's the fact that he discounted the ketzira shows that he's leaning more on the bringing. The ketzira is only like a hachana to the bringing. Okay. So now at least we know. Rabbi Yoina says koydem. It's not so complicated. Rabbi Yoina holds that the taking root has to be koydem ketzira. Rabbi Yossi is more lenient. Because according to Rabbi Yossi, if you planted it a day later, bottom line, we'll see in a moment. Since it took root halachically before the hava, then either the yoim or the carbon or hiskan Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakai, the end of the yoim, whatever you learn, now it's matter that. Amar Rabbi Yoina. Says Rabbi Yoina, now Rabbi Yoina is the one that says koydem ketzira milsa de kahana mesayali. It's all about, he's being more machmir. In order for something to become mutter, the new crop needed to take root before the ketzira. How do I know that? Now Rav Kahana is great. It's funny how Rebbe Kahana, here he's called Kahana. The Kahana Omar says in the beginning of Vayikra, and guys, let's read the entire pasuk in Torah Yerushalmi. The imtakriv minchas bikurim laHashem. Guys, this pasuk is speaking about the omer. We already had this a few daf ago. That's the aviv. That's how did we know that the omer should come from barley? Hashem never wrote sa'odim. It's because in this pasuk, remember that it says aviv. It says by makas barad that has sa'oida aviv. That's how we know it's sa'oida. But anyways, aviv koli ba'esh geres karmel takriv eis minchas bikurecha. That's the pasuk in Vayikra. Says Reb Kahana, or Godol Mirabon Shemoi. This is a compliment, not a lack of respect. Kahana Amar, that when it says Vim takriv minchas bikurim Lashem, so he's medayik zu, the grain itself that you're using for the omer has to be bikeda, has to be ripe barley. What do I mean by ripe barley? We're going to read it. We're going to read it in a moment. The Rash but let me just say it by heart. Who knows the taich of carmel? So Rashi writes, carmel is a composite of two words, rach and mol. Even though kad is kaf reish, reverse it. Soft but full, because when something is fully ripe, not overripe, the grains they're soft still, but they're full. So the ones that you are harvesting for the carbon has to be ripe. But don't forget, there is the matir, and then there is the other grains that it is permitting. The other grains, that's the ho'acheres. The other grains don't have to be ripe for it to be permitted. What does it need to be, guys? We learned this in the Mishnah. It has to take root. Haga atzmacha, in other words, says Kahana, based on this diuk, like this has to be ripe. I mean, everything else doesn't have to be ripe. How little along does it have to be? Even if it only reached the stage where you're called the grain grass, and then he goes further. Was afilu asavim, at least it grew. But it's even more than that. Afilu hashrasha ha'omer ba umatir. Now, by the way, this doesn't show you that it has to take hashrasha before ktsira. But now shows Rabbi Yoina, since Rav Kahana learns that which is becoming permitted doesn't have to be ripe. It can even be in the stage of Ashrasha from this pasuk v'im takriv minchas b'kodem lashem. Rabbi Yoina makes a stretch. It must be this pasuk is speaking about the ktsira, and I'll show you in a moment the way that Rashi really learns it. Now this is now Rabbi Yoina speaking. V'la koidim l'ktsira anan kayamim. Does it not imply that it has to take root, but it's not enough that it takes root before the bringing. It has to take root before the cutting. Look inside the second to last line in the right column, Rashidilio. V'laf koidim l'ktsira, really, evachuli. The ha, when the Rab Kahana is saying there is the one that you're using for the carbon, zu bikra or bikeda, however you pronounce it, that is the matir. What's becoming mutered? The other, ho acheres loy bikeda. So we want them to be similar. The whole loy bikeda, dumya the bikeda. Now, what is this pasuk ubikeda? The one that became ripe. When is it ripe? It's not only that it's ripe when you bring it. That's not what the Torah is saying. Vim takrev minchas bikurim lashem. You know when it needs to be ripe, my friends, to make the best quality barley to bring as a carbon. When the gizbarim of the Beis Hamikdash went out to the fields to determine what to harvest, it was during the harvest that they determined that it's ripe. Makes sense? Shekoitzrin oisolo oimer. Habashas ketzira hi karmel. Top of the left column in the Rashidilyo, which is kar and mole. Uba oises man hu di darshinan that ho acheres loy bikeda. Just like the need of it being bikedaed, ripe. It's not only that it's ripe when you bring it. Doesn't work that way. It's ripe when you harvested it. So the whole limud that this has to be ripe, the other doesn't have to be ripe, but it at least has to have taken root, is also during this man of the ktsira. So from his limud, you can extrapolate that Rav Kahana holds, which is l'chumra, the way we now know Rabbi Yoina holds that what needs to happen to everything that will become permitted, the Mishnah says it has to take root. But when, it's amazing, the matir is the bringing, but the taking root is before the ktsira. That's proof number one. Rabbi Yoina goes further. For oid min hada, and I'll bring you another proof, which is the Tani we learned in a brayso. Hamenakesh b'shloisha asar. What happens if someone who was weeding a field on the 13th day of Nisan and inadvertently, accidentally, v'nitla shakelach b'yada, he plucked out a stalk of grain. I want to make a record over here, guys. If I plucked out grain before the bringing of the omer, if I plucked out the grain, the omer will permit it. Here, we're not talking about halachas yet. We're talking about a farmer who knows what he's doing. If you pluck out grain prior to its full maturity, you know what you would do? You would put it back in the ground. But there's a problem, because when you put it back in the ground, as we'll see, it takes 3 days to take root. And it has to take root before. I want to add another detail, another important detail. If the grain that you plucked out already reached the level of a shlish, what I'm saying is very important, and you plucked it out by accident, and you put it back into the ground, and it didn't have 3 days before the omer is brought, or before whatever, it's also going to be okay. Why? Because the grain was in the world before the omer. But if what you plucked out, by mistake, you wouldn't do it. It was something that didn't even reach a shlish. For the omer to be mated, it needed to be rooted in the ground. And that's the case over here. So a guy by mistake plucked out a piece of any one of the 5 grains. And then what he did is whatever any farmer would do, especially it didn't even reach a third. So put it back now, another little nuance. When we say that it takes 3 days, I want to say right now, it's not uniform because there are different types of lands. A land that's very dry is a land that's not being makabel so quickly a plant. It needs more time for it to marry the plant, for the plant to take hashrasha in it. But as long as when you put it back into the ground, you planted it in moist earth, taf zayin omid beis, but not in dry earth, then think about it, 13, 14, 15, again, that's the 3 days, now you're good to go. Repeating, chevra, if the grain that you uprooted by mistake or on purpose already reached a shlish or more, a shlish means a third of its full maturity. Or let me word it differently. If you are a farmer and you know how much flour do you squeeze out of every stalk, it reached a level that you can get a third of the max. At least that. I don't care if it took root or not, because so what? The oimer was mated it. But if it didn't reach a shlish, that's the rule. For the oimer to be mated it has to be rooted in the ground. No one would pluck out something on purpose before a shlish, but that was it happened by accident. So what do we see from over here? Now this is all going to be a braisa that will be a proof to Rab Yoina, who now we know says koidam ktsira. I'll tell you by heart. Then, if what's needed is for it to take root before the actual bringing, the oimer is brought on the 16th during the day. Based on the rule, I know you need to have halachically 3 days, but it's not 72 hours, 3 days. We're going to use the mixas hayom kekule rule that I'll speak more in a moment. So even if someone were to plant it on the 14th, you have the 14th, you have the 15th, and don't forget the oimer is brought 7 a.m., 8 a.m. We keep, it's not brought there. It's already mixas hayom. So you have enough of the 16th. The fact that the Braisa is saying that you needed to plant it in moist earth on the 13th is why. I'll tell you why. Because this Braisa holds the way we know now Rabbi Yoina to hold, the way we are suggesting Rav Kahana holds, that it has to take root before the Ktsira. The Ktsira happens in the beginning of the 16th. So it has to take root before the Ktsira. Has to take root on the 15th. So you need to have 3 days. Also, mixas hayom kekule, 13, 14, 15. Let's read it inside. Harei, zok Gemara. Yesh kan shleisha asar. It works. 13, 14th, and 15th. Even though it doesn't say when in the 13th. Could be you planted it in the 13th in the afternoon. For that we say, umixas hayom kekuloi. Now all of this, the Gemara doesn't have to speak out. According to Rabbi Yossi, that we now know holds, Rabbi Yossi is the lenient. It has to take root before the hava. Then you should be allowed even to put it back. B'makem hatina. But even on the 14th. I want to say the following regarding mixas hayom kekuli, because we're learning today Erev Tisha B'Av. How great would it have been if we would have said mixas hayom kekuli on Tisha B'Av for the fast? I want to point out, this is a big sugya, and there are different approaches, and none of them are like, wow. Each one has a problem, at least from the little that I know. When do we say mixas hayom kekuli? When don't we say it? Give you an example. Tisha B'Av is connected to Avelus. By Avelus, for those of us who know, we know. Even if you didn't do it personally, today also we're dedicating today's class for your brother, Kevan. Think about Avelus, 7 days, Takamid Rabbanon, but 7 days doesn't mean 7 full days. Mixas hayom kekuli. Sometimes here in these dinim, you would think taking root needs a certain amount of time. It's amazing. We don't say that. We say mixas hayom kekuli. Huh? But that's the whole difference, because since the Ktsira happens in the beginning of the 16th, if it has to take root, Koidim Ktsira, it has to take root on the day of the 15th. And for that, we're saying it doesn't make a difference whether you planted it the 13th in the morning, or the night of the 13th, or the 13th before Shkia. Taking root takes 7, it's not about hours. I want to go even to Shivas Nakiyim. Think about it. You guys, let's remember how it used to be, that when you were Shivas Nakiyim, Midoraisa is only when there's Ziva, not when there's Nida. By Nida, you don't need any Nakiyim. And by Ziva, when did a woman go to the mikvah? She went to the mikveh during the day. She didn't go to the mikveh at night. Even though to be together with her husband, she needed to wait until the night, because if she's going to see dam after the mikveh, it's going to retroactively take away the mikveh. So then, we learned, we keep on learning this in the Rambam, but we learned this together in the Gemara together. Imagine, it's a personal count, Mixas Hayom Kekulei. By Shiva, Mixas Hayom Kekulei. By many other Dinei Torah, we don't say Mixas Hayom Kekulei. Let's go to a fast day. So, there's a question is, when do we say it? When don't we say it? I'm not going to share the answers because every answer that I heard is incomplete. There's going to be exceptions, that things that you have to add. Okay, but anyways, here, how ironic that Hashrasha. It's very difficult to understand because Hashrasha is like a physical phenomenon. From when you put it in the ground, it needs a certain amount of time. You would argue it's a consistent time. We don't say that. It has to do with days, has to do with Jewish days. Mixas Hayom Kekulei. Okay. So now this see, Rav Kahana, that seems to be holding with Rabbi Yoina, Rabbi Yossi doesn't have to deal with him, and Amoida can argue with an Amoida. Here we have a Braisa. Generally, I know yesterday we said Rabbi Chia Tano Palig. That's very exceptional. Rav Tano Palig, even Rabbi Yochanan, I think sometimes we can say that Tano Palig, not a Rabbi Yossi. So now really this is a kash against Rabbi Yossi. According to Rabbi Yossi, who now we know is the one that says Koidem Hava, then according to Rabbi Yossi, the farmer could have planted it even on the 14th. So Amar Rabbi Yossi, the emes is you're right. You could plant it on the 14th, but you're forgetting that the 14th of Nisan happens to be Erev Pesach. And on Erev Pesach, there were people that have a minig not to do malacha. Guys, after Chatzois, if you remember the Mishnah and Psachim, no one is allowed to do malacha. We're not talking about Meleches Shabbos. We're talking about going to work, what we call in our B'Shem HaMushal, working. We don't work on Erev Pesach. The question is, can you work on Erev Pesach in the AM? So says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yossi Milsei de Ravina. Now I know Ravina, who learned the Braisa, said something, and that's going to back me up. What did Rav Avina say? The Amar Rav Avina Tiftor, that this Braisa is following as we learned elsewhere, which is in the Mishnah Psachim, that b'makem shenahagu shalalasas malacha ba'arba asa. It's really, since Rabbi Yossi holds that it has to take root before the Hava, even if the farmer took this grain that didn't even reach a shlish, that has to be hashrashad. If he would have planted it back in the ground on the 14th, because of Mixas Hayom Kekulei, it would become permitted from the Omer. Why? 14, 15, 16. But you can't plant on the 14th. The Gemara is going to go back and forth. And shows a Pashat. Says the Gemara, Avol, what are you telling me? Asks the Gemara, the Mokem Shenahagu, yes, to do malacha ba'arba asar. Don't you know? Says the Gemara, Eloi is Eloi, it's only in Talush. Are you telling me Shama b'mechumar? The Gemara is saying there were never people that worked on the 14th, even in the AM, on mechubar lakarka. In other words, we are accepting the answer. We're challenging Rabbi Avina. Why did Rabbi Avina have to say that this Braisa is only going according to those, following the Makim Shenahagu Shalei Lasis Malacha? Be'emes, the Gemara is saying it's much more than that. Even the communities that allowed themselves to do what we call work, they went to their work to make a parnasa until Chatzoi Sayoim. They also did not work b'mechubar. The Gemara says it's not true. The Gemara says, no, Ashkach Plani, actually, no, it's not Shemesh, and it's not a Rabbi Avina. Rabbi Avina found a Braisa. Mokim shenohagu lasis malacha b'talush. Beferish, oisen afila b'mechuber. There's a Braisa that actually says that in those communities that they didn't have this extra chumrah, they allowed themselves to work until Chatzoi Sayoim. Beferish, not only would they work on talush, they would work on mechuber. And therefore, again, Rabbi Avina obviously held like Rabbi Yossi, that the hashrasha has to be koidam hava. And for that, theoretically, if someone would to plant it on the 14th, the Omer would be matir it. But since you can't plant on the 14th, that's why the Braisa says that as long as it happened on the 13th, vada, if it happened before that, then you're good to go. Bottom line is, Rabbi Yossi was not refuted. At least we clarified who says what. And again, to have clarity that there are two separate sugyas that we're learning, don't confuse one with the other. Before today, yesterday, 2 days ago, we were learning about what is going to trigger the heter. What's the matir? The yoim or the carbon? Now we're learning what is becoming permitted. the chadash. How far does the chadash have to be? The Mishnah says has to be taken root. But what the Mishnah did not clarify is, does it have to take root before the mater happens or before the ktsira happens? And that's the machlokes. And Rabbi Yoina is machmer. He says it has to happen before the ktsira. Now, ve'im lav, now we're continuing to quote from the Mishnah. If it didn't take root, that would mean, guys, that let me go now with Rabbi Yoina, right? That it has to be before ktsira. Someone planted it on the 14th. We just learned that. And there were places that you were allowed to work the land. They planted it on the 14th. It's amazing. Says, according to Rabbi Yoina now, you can't eat that. When can you eat that? After next year's Omer. It wasn't enough ba'olam for it to have become permitted. Okay, that's ve'im lav asurim acha yava yomer rabba. So now asks the Gemara, and that will be the final topic of today. Rabbi Lazar the Amoira asked, Ma'u sheyavi ha'omer mayhem. Okay, when the next year comes, since it's bound to the Omer, if it's becoming muttered from the Omer, perhaps it can be the mater. It could be the Omer itself. Now, you would even say, why not? We said this in the intro. I'll tell you why not. Aside of the din of the Omer and how things work, when is it going to become permitted? When wasn't it enough for it to have become? Aside of that, there is the general rule that every product has its year. This rule is used, my friends, for all trumas or maasros. Now, it's not so pashut, because the determinant of the year could be Echad B'Tishrei, generally. By fruits, don't get confused. The year begins either Rosh Chodesh Shvat, L'Beishama, or Tu B'Shvat. Like, it's not so pashut. Aside of what is the date, aside of that, there's something else that you have to know. How much of that item has to be in the world for you to say it was already here in the prior year? And it depends. By tfuah, a shlish. By vegetables, not a shlish. By vegetables is pashut. When was it harvested? By vegetables, basar likutoi isuroi. When you want to know for its maasros, what year does it belong to? When was it harvested? By fruit, chanata, and the date is another date, like we said, shvat. For grain, now this is only 5 grains. So just for grain, first of all, its Rosh Hashanah is what we call Rosh Hashanah, Echad B'Tishrei, but it's not enough to know the date. What needed to happen before what we call Rosh Hashanah? It needed to be grown a third. Now, when we're speaking about someone who had Omer that didn't take root before the Ketzira or the Hava, you're kidding. We're talking about something that was planted in Nisan. We just learned it takes 3 days to take Hashrasha. I don't know how much time it takes to take a shlish. If something was planted in Nisan, even for us city people, it became a third before Rosh Hashanah. In other words, this Omer, this Chadash that is Asur, it belongs to the old year. It's called the old crop. I'm going back to the Mesechtas Ma'aser Sheni, Mesechtas Ma'aser, Mesechtas Trumas. We learned about this. So there's a big logic to say that since it belongs to the old crop, how can you bring a carbon to be mater the Chadash new crop from Chadash old crop? They're both Chadash. Maybe not, but maybe yeah. That was his question. And the Gemara, you have to know, you have to accept. You know, some questions are questions that have answers, and some questions the Gemara found to be a question that should not have even been asked, even though we're recording it. And this is such a question. So the Gemara is like, goes back, Efsher Loimer, how can you even think that you should be allowed to bring the Omer from this? Because Chadash v'Yashan doesn't mean Chadash for the dinim that we are learning. Chadash and Yashan refers to what I was speaking about. That when I'm toirim uma'aser, I can't take apples. They're both tevel. But if this is from Tavshin Peivav, and that is from Tavshin Pei Hey, that's the Chadash v'Yashan, you're not toirim uma'aser one on the other. Taking trumas from this cannot be mater the old. Taking from the old cannot be mater the new. That's a rule. Chadash v'Yashan ein toirim uma'aser mizeh zeh. So what's even your havamina? Va'at omar hachin. And you even are asking, avada, you cannot bring it. Now, the fact that you can't eat it, you can't eat it. What will make it permissible to be eaten? The Omer. But the omer that you're bringing this year on the 16th has to be from this year's crop, meaning that it only became a third after its Rosh Hashanah a couple of months earlier. And the Gemara challenges the challenge by saying, Hativain, I object what you're saying. You're telling me Chodesh v'Yoshin ain't Toim Masam Zeh has nothing to do with the omer, and I'll prove it to you. How do we prove it? What does the omer come from, guys? The omer comes from barley only. What is the omer matir? What is it permitting? Not only barley, wheat and spelt and oats and rye. Let me ask you a question. Can you bring the omer from spelt? Absolutely not. Cannot bring it from spelt. So says the Gemara, Hativain, Harei Shar Haminim, Hareihem Tuluyim Bo'omer. And still, the Ein Ha'omer Ba'mehem. No. Akir. Not only are we accepting the Efshel Loimar, we're not done yet. So Rabbi Lazar was told, why did you even ask? Why not? Because it's Chodesh and Yashin. The Gemara is saying, I have another reason why you shouldn't have asked. What's the other reason? What was his logic to permit it? How did we explain it? We said, since it's becoming permitted, what would be the side that he had in his kasha to bring it? Since it's becoming permitted through the Omer, so it's related to the Omer, so maybe it can be brought as the Omer. Why did you even think that, asks the Gemara? Spelt is becoming permitted from the Omer, but no one has a Havamina to bring it as the Omer. Wheat is becoming permitted from the Omer. No one has a dream to bring it as the Omer. Omer can only be from barley. So that's another, in other words, it wasn't enough for us to tell Rabbi Lazar, Efshel Loimar, how can it be? Of course not. I have another reason why you shouldn't have asked the question. Because why would you even think it's permitted, like we mentioned? Rabbi Lazar knew that it's Chodesh and Yashin, but we said the other side is, since it's becoming permitted by the Omer, it should be eligible to serve as Omer. That logic doesn't go with Omer, because to have 4 of the 5 grains become permitted from the Omer, and none of them are eligible for the Omer. So again, another kasha. Hatima, what was Yahavamina again? The Gemara says, that's not a refutation. That's not a refutation. Loi, dafches. Im omarta bishar haminim. When it comes to the other 4 of the 5 types of grain, wheat, spelt, oats, and rye, since sholei kashru leminchas omer, we know from aviv that they cannot be brought from the omer. God says, bring me barley, but barley is to be brought. Toimer b'soirim. That yes, shekashru leminchas omer. So mitzad that, Rabbi Lazar did have a leg to stand on when he asked the question by using this logic that since the old crop, I'm calling it old because it became a shlish ready before Rosh Hashanah. Since the old crop is becoming permitted through the Omer, it should be eligible to serve as the Omer. That's why he had a side to ask. But again, the Gemara is not answering a question. The Gemara is still being critical of Rabbi Lazar. What's even your Havamina? Avad not. For sure not. It's becoming permitted from the Omer. But the Omer has to come from the new crop. We'll stop over here.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Rabbi, isn't
Yes.
the Omer normally harvested the night before they bring it?
It is harvested the night before we bring it. Why
So
are you
this whole
asking?
question is like a wild theoretical that you would harvest it a year beforehand and hold it for a year later. That's what we're saying here?
No. We're saying that it took, since it took root. No. We're saying someone planted whichever one of the 5 grains so late, so close to Pesach, that it didn't even take root either before the Ketzira or before the Hava. And that remains Chadash until next year's Omer. That's exactly what we're saying.
They left it in the ground for a year? That's the
No, they didn't leave it in the ground. They didn't leave it in the ground. It would get rotten.
That's what I'm saying. So they harvested it and then they held on to it.
Danny is pointing out, again, I already mentioned this, that there are 2 dinim of Chadash. One, everyone adhered to in Eretz Yisrael. The other one, people were not so strict with. The first one is you can't eat it before the Omer, which is what we're speaking about. The emes is that lechatchila, I'm saying lechatchila, Because if someone harvested, which is in this case, Danny, that's what happened. Let's say someone planted it on the 14th. And let's say it needs to be in the ground 60 days. I don't know. Not more, 90 days. And for sure, not more than that. So they harvested it Shavuos time. Maybe even in this case, it's lechatchila because it's going to get ruined, the baltashkes. But no one can eat it. One thing we learned together, that when they would bring the omer, they would go in the markets of Yerushalmi, it would be filled with flour of chadash. Well, the people did that. Now, you can also argue that if the ketziras mattered the ketzira, everyone held to that. In other words, after people harvested the barley in the night of the 16th, everyone knew they did that. Then everyone went and they harvested all their stuff to have it ready for the next day in the market. That can also be. Bottom line, Danny, yes, you're right. That people were not so strict, wrongfully so, when it came to the prohibition of even harvesting chadash. Any time until before the omer. No, it's really to harvest chadash, you have to wait until the omer is brought. Not only can you not eat it, you shouldn't even harvest it. In the case that we're learning, for sure, people harvested it, but they put it in their shelf, they put it away, and they waited until the next year's omer is brought.